1990 was the beginning of a new decade for NASCAR, and the beginning of a new season for the Winston Cup Series. Richard Petty was about to start his 33rd season in NASCAR, and was also looking to rebound from a disappointing 1989 season. In 1989, for the first time in his career, Richard Petty failed to finish inside the top 10. Petty also had 12 DNFs, 4 DNQs, and finished 29th in the final standings, the worst season of his career. But would 1990 be a better year for Richard Petty? I can tell you now, it was slightly better, but just about equal to 1989. Almost the same. So let's take a look at part 3 of the final years of Richard Petty's career, 1990. Richard Petty's 1990 season started off with a new crew chief, as 25-year-old Robbie Loomis would replace a longtime crew chief Dale Inman atop the pit box. Robbie Loomis. That name sure sounds familiar. Petty's 1990 speedweeks began with him qualifying 11th for the Daytona 500, meaning he would start 6th in the first Twin 125 qualifier. Petty had a very fast car in the first Twin 125 and was able to stay up front with the leaders in the early stages, but on lap 27, the fans came to their feet. Coming off turn 4 to begin lap 28, Richard Petty got a run on leader Ken Schrader and was able to move to the inside and to take the lead. And for the first time since 1984, his 200th win, Richard Petty led a lap at Daytona. With 8 laps to go, Petty was still leading and had Schrader, Darrell Waltrip, and Mark Martin right behind him when all 4 came onto pit road for fuel. Petty lost the lead and wound up finishing 5th after avoiding a last lap wreck between Ken Schrader and Hutch Strickland. Petty also led 15 of the 50 laps. With his 11th place qualifying run and his 5th place finish, Petty would hold on to his 11th place starting position for the Daytona 500. As the Daytona 500 began, Petty told the crew that his car was becoming too tight and started to fall back in the field, but on lap 26, disaster struck. While running behind Rick Wilson in turn 1, Petty's left rear tire went down. Petty spun and managed to keep the car off the wall, but had to be towed back to the pits after getting stuck in the grass. Richard Petty would finish 34th, 17 laps down in the Daytona 500. The next week at Richmond, Petty would get his first DNF of the season. After qualifying in last for the Pontiac Excitement 400, Petty would spin out coming onto the front stretch on lap 87 and would come to rest up against the outside wall. Davey Allison would also spin his car trying to avoid Petty. Petty would DNF 35th. Even though he did not finish the race, Petty would move up 1 spot in the points to 33rd. Next week at Rockingham, Petty would receive his second DNF of the season, after blowing his engine, leaving him 32nd, and would drop him back to 34th in the standings. Race 4 at Atlanta, Petty qualified 32nd, and when around the halfway mark was running in 10th, but would slap the wall coming out of turn 3. Petty received minor damage and brought his car down pit road, and the crew went to work to repair the damage, but brought the SCP Pontiac behind the wall. Petty returned to the track and would finish in 25th, 13 laps down, his best finish of the season so far. Petty would also gain 3 spots in the standings, moving up to 31st. Race 5 at Darlington, Richard started 25th, and on lap 349, Jack Pennington spun off turn 4 and almost collected Richard Petty, as well as Dale Earnhardt and Morgan Shepherd. Later on, Petty would pull behind the wall with engine problems, finishing in 21st, his new best finish of the season so far. The next race at Bristol, Petty started 28th, but later in the race would DNF due to engine problems, leaving him 26th. Once again, Petty would gain another spot in points and move to 29th. The first Union 400 at North Wilkesboro was the 7th race of the season, and it would end up being an up-and-down day for Richard Petty. In a race that is remembered today for its infamous scoring error between Brett Bodine and Dale Earnhardt, Petty started 23rd, and by lap 10, was already caught up in a wreck. Going into turn 2, a group of cars stacked up, which caused rookie contender Rob Moroso to check up to the outside. As Moroso came back down to the inside, Richard Petty was already making his move, and the two made contact. Petty's car then got up on 2 wheels and ran right over the left front of Moroso's car. The two of Rick Mast was also involved. While Moroso would DNF, Petty continued on, with minor damage, but on lap 204, Petty was involved in his second incident of the day. Coming off turn 2, the 28 of Davey Allison spun, and as Petty tried to avoid Allison, the 57 of Jimmy Spencer hit Petty in the right rear and spun him into the outside wall. Petty's car was then hooked up to a tow truck and taken behind the wall. Petty would finish in 29th, his 5th DNF of the season, and again would gain another spot in points, moving him up to 28. Race 8 at Martinsville, Petty started in 22nd, and on lap 3 would bring out the first caution, as he would spin in turn 4 after being tapped by the 76 of Bill Sedgwick. Petty would finish in the race in 20th, 16 laps down, his best finish of the season so far. Talladega was a stressful race for Richard Petty. The Petty Enterprises team had brought the engine Petty used back in the Twin 125 at Daytona in February, but would end up having a problem with it. They pulled the engine out of the car an hour before the race started. They didn't even have an engine in the car, while every other car was on pit road ready to start. The team borrowed an engine from Morgan McClure Motorsports, but because Morgan McClure fielded Oldsmobiles, the engine wouldn't fit in Petty's Pontiac, so the crew took sledgehammers and beat the headers to get the engine to fit. They were able to get Petty on pit road to start the race, and while under caution on lap 13, Petty brought the STP Pontiac on pit road and said the engine was sputtering. Petty would finish in 29th, 51 laps down. At Charlotte, Petty was not eligible to compete in the Winston, and had to compete in the Winston Open to race his way in. Petty would finish 7th in the Open, and would not race his way into the Winston. Petty started 30th for the Coca-Cola 600 the next week, and towards the later stages of the race, Petty was suffering from fatigue, and had to be relieved by Sterling Marlin. Later on, Marlin would turn the car over to Hutch Strickland. Eventually, the 43 car would end up leaking oil, and Strickland brought the 43 behind the wall, finishing in 27th and giving the 43 its 6th DNF of the season. At Dover, Richard started 23rd and for the second week in a row had to be relieved by another driver. On lap 220, Petty was suffering again from fatigue and had Larry Pearson take the wheel. Pearson brought the 43 home to a 21st place finish, 16 laps down. At Sonoma, while under caution for rookie Rob Moroso, Richard broke his rear sway bar. While Richard was trying to make it back to the pits, he blew his left rear tire, and eventually blew the right rear tire as well, and spun the car around. Because his rear sway bar was broken, and both rear tires were blown out, the rear of the car was literally sitting on the ground, and Richard couldn't drive away. Richard was hooked up to a wrecker and towed back to the pits. Petty would finish in 26th, 3 laps down. The next week at Pocono, Petty would wreck hard off turn 2, resulting in his 7th DNF of the season. Race 14 at Michigan, Richard would have his best run of the season yet. Richard started in 29th and immediately began to move up, and was able to challenge with the leaders. Petty would fall just one spot short of a top 10 and would finish in 11th, his new season best finish and his first lead lap finish of the season. At Daytona for the Pepsi 400, Petty's day ended early. Petty started 7th, his best qualifying position of the 1990 season. Going down the backstretch on lap 1, Petty was 3 wide with Greg Sachs and Daytona 500 winner Derek Cope. Coming into the trial oval to complete lap 1, Sachs made contact with Cope, and as Sachs tried to correct, he became loose and would end up clipping Petty's right rear, sending all 3 into the wall along with 20 other cars. Petty would finish in 36th, his 8th DNF of the season. At Pocono, Petty would have his best run of the entire 1990 season, as he would finish in 9th on the lead lap, his best finish of the season, and his second and final lead lap finish of the season. Petty would finish in 29th, 5 laps down the next week at Talladega, and 18th, 1 lap down at Watkins Glen. The next 3 races would be a disappointing run for Richard Petty, as he would DNF 3 straight races in a row. A 33rd place finish at Michigan after leading 5 laps due to a blown engine. Fatigue left him 29th at Bristol, and a blown engine at Darlington left him in 34th. bringing his DNF total of the season to 11 and dropping him to 27th in points. Petty would go on to finish 6 laps down in 21st the next week at Richmond and 6 laps down in 16th at Dover, still maintaining his 27th place in points. Richard started 21st at Martinsville, and on lap 3, the 19 of Chad Little spun off turn 2, and Richard slowed down to avoid hitting Little. Petty would continue on, but would end up spinning in turn 2 later in the race. Richard would eventually go behind the wall, citing engine problems, resulting in a 29th place finish, his 12th DNF of the season, and his final DNF of the season. Petty would finish 17th, 3 laps down the next week at North Wilkesboro. That same day, hours after the race had ended, rookie contender Rob Moroso was killed in a car accident. It was later found out that Moroso had been drunk and was well above the legal limit when the accident happened. Moroso would posthumously win the 1990 Winston Cup Rookie of the Year award. Race 26 at Charlotte, Petty started in 18th, and on lap 101, Chad Little and Jimmy Spencer got together on the front stretch, and Richard had to go to the inside to avoid the two cars before going on to finish 18th, 5 laps down, moving him back up to 26th in the points. Petty would go on to finish 21st, 7 laps down at Rockingham, and at Phoenix would be involved in a caution on lap 128 after Winston West driver Mike Chase wrecked in turn 4. As Petty entered the turn, he slowed down to avoid hitting Chase's car, and as he was slowing down, Dale Jarrett, who was trying to race leader Dale Earnhardt back to the line to get his lap back, drove into the turn way too hot and got into Petty's left rear, spinning Petty around. Petty would go on to finish 23rd, 4 laps down, but would move up to 25th in points, the highest he would be in points all season long. We've now come to race 29 of the season, the Atlanta Journal 500, the final race of the 1990 NASCAR Winston Cup Series season. Richard started in 22nd and would go on to finish 17th, 4 laps down, and dropping him back down to 26th in the final point standings. However, on lap 297, tragedy would strike. Rick Wilson, in the number 75 Oldsmobile, would crash in turn 4, and the field came onto pit road for their stops. Bill Elliott, who was leading the race, came into his pit stall, and his crew began to service the car. As the pit stop was underway, Ricky Rudd, who was making his way to his stall just in front of Elliott's, locked up his brakes, attempting to slow down, causing him to spin towards Elliott's stall at full speed. Rudd hit Elliott's car in the right rear and also hit 2 of Elliott's crewmen. Tommy Cole, the jackman, was hit and suffered a broken arm, but Mike Rich, who was changing the right rear tire, was pinned between Rudd and Elliott's cars. Rich was severely injured and taken to a local hospital and passed away hours later. Mike Rich was just 32 years old. NASCAR would implement a new safety rule on pit road for 1991, a speed limit. Now, when a driver makes a pit stop, they must follow a speed limit and slow down when entering pit road. So now, the 1990 season is officially over, and looking back at Richard Petty's season and comparing it to 1990 and 1989, the results were slightly better. Petty had 0 wins, 0 top 10s, led 9 laps, had 4 DNQs and 12 DNFs in 1989, with a 29th place points finish. In 1990, Petty had 0 wins, 1 top 10, led 5 laps, 0 DNQs, 12 DNFs, and a 26th place points finish. So 1990 was a little better than 1989, but just about equal. With Petty's performance and his competitiveness continuing to decline, it looked almost certain that Richard Petty would retire for 1991. But that wasn't the case. Petty, however, did return for the 1991 season, but later that season would make an announcement that would sadden some, surprise no one, and gladden others. But that's another story for another time. Join me next time for part 4 of the final years of Richard Petty's career, 19 91.